Hey YouTube, welcome to episode 10 of Anxiety and Depression Adventures. We've hit our 10th episode and collected some viewers along the way, not a ton. So certainly would appreciate any feedback from those of you watching as to what you'd like to see differently in these videos that would be of more interest or value to people out there in the listening community, watching community. Anyway, today's video I'm entitling Dysfunctional Society. And the reason I'm doing this is because yesterday in Canada was National Let's Talk Day. And this is a day that has been championed by one of the largest corporations in Canada around discussing mental health issues, getting it out in the open, removing the stigma, and making people feel comfortable letting others know what they're handling. Statistically, in North America, 2 out of 3 individuals sometime in their lifetime are going to have a mental health challenge of some variety. And if you're watching this channel right now, I'll bet you're one of them, as am I. So let me just give you my own personal reflections as to some contributing factors in society that may not have been present 50 or 100 years ago, that may or may not have made the difference in why so many of us are struggling with mental health. So if you take a look at your family today, let's take the perfect typical North American family unit. 2 parents, 2 children, a dog, a home, at least 1 vehicle, probably 2, and both parents working. Contrast that with the typical family of, let's go back to, 100 years ago. At the turn of the century then, what was the typical family appearance? Well, it was 2 parents. I much that's something we can pretty much guarantee. Less divorce, much less work for the mother outside of the home. The father being the sole breadwinner and probably in a lifelong career, either with a company or in a profession or farming or what have you, and more than likely more than 2 children. So when you think about it, I'm not saying life back then was any easier, but, and I make no commentary with respect to whether it's good or bad as to the role of the mother or the wife in the home. So don't get me wrong on that. But roles were more defined. Roles were more acceptable by society, particularly once children came along. So we saw women focusing on the home, taking care of the home, in many instances possibly the finances of the home, though in all likelihood the husband had a lot to do with that part of it. But they were focused on raising the children, the cooking, your typical, even if we fast forwarded up to the 1960s and 70s, I remember watching the Dick Van Dyke Show, the wife and mom, even with 1 kid, was at home and had supper ready when Dick walked in the front door and tripped over the ottoman into the living room. That was the way it was. And they seem to get along fine financially. Now, of course, stuff on TV is always not the true reality of the scenario, but I think you're getting my drift. And the husband, 100-odd years ago, was focused on his job, his career, which likely was a lifelong career. Even 50 years ago, it would have been like that. The sole breadwinner. So on the one hand, yeah, probably a lot of pressure to keep that job, but on the other hand, not like today where we can expect to have anywhere from 10 to 15 different careers in a working lifespan. And change does impose quite a bit of stress on individuals, which may not have been present 100 years back. So when you look purely at domestic dynamics between the old family structure and the current one, I'm not saying one is better than the other, there are marked differences. So today, for example, it is now unusual for one of the parents to be full-time at home with the children. There are therefore career pressures on both adults within the family. Society expects women to work, irregardless of children. Birth rates are down substantially. A large family today is anything more than 2 children in North America. We don't even produce enough children to sustain our population, which is why immigration is so important. So the focus for both parents has definitely shifted. Divorce rates have skyrocketed, which adds an element of emotional pain for everyone. People, as I just mentioned, are in multiple careers over the course of their lifetime, whether they like it or not, forced into it or not, and everything is more expensive. And that can be partially, I've seen situations where families have gotten by on very meager income with the mother or father staying at home full time and having multiple children, more than 2. But they don't have fancy curtains, they don't have more than one vehicle, they don't necessarily own their home, they certainly don't have a large home, it's very Spartan on the inside, but they've made their choices based on their values, and I've got to tell you, I got a hell of a lot of respect for them. But typically, I think you'd agree, most families today have a dual income family environment. So the kids are farmed off to daycare. There's guilt for both parents, more specifically the mother, when it comes to that. And as always, I'm just speaking from personal experience. There's cost associated with that, with both parents working. Often there's a necessity for 2 vehicles, and that adds to the financial strain on the household. And society kind of looks, I'd say, down their snotty nose at if one of the parents chooses to take paternity leave or the full year maternity leave here in Canada, or, God forbid, stay home, period, and actually focus on their kids. There are enormous career pressures, particularly for women, to perform, and they want to break through that famous glass ceiling at the executive level and go beyond. But we all know in order to do that, there aren't enough hours in the day, so something's got to give at some point or another. We also, as an extension of family, have an expectation that I believe this was born out of post-Second World War and with the baby boomers, when people actually had more than 2 children, typically. It was a little bit before when I was born in the late 60s, but nonetheless, it's there. And it somewhat set an expectation that because the boomers got better paying jobs, higher levels of education, especially in the 1980s, disproportionately higher incomes for certain sectors. A lot of expensive cars on the road, lots of credit card debt being racked up, big houses being built, and so forth. But generally speaking, the expectation, which isn't a bad one, was that the children of the former generation were going to do better. Their own parents from the war years wanted their children to get a better education, to have a chance at a better job, to have a better lifestyle than they had. And now we're at the point where their grandchildren, kind of like my own children, I suppose, or even me, depending on where you cut off the boomer end date, we somewhat were raised with the expectation that we would have more than our parents did, yet our parents actually were probably the most wealthy of all generations, going back, unless you're in the aristocracy or something like that, or you happen to have old money. So this has built up both a push and a pull, society-wise. Push on the form of parents feeling the obligation to be all things and provide all supports for their children, and pull on the children's side and peer pressure that, yeah, I ought to have that next Xbox, and yeah, I do need a cell phone, and yeah, I do want my own car when I get my driver's license, and on and on and on. And I think now what we're seeing is the stressors of all of this. We've pulled that elastic band so far that it's snapping all over the place for people. And I don't just mean mentally, I mean financially. I mean, how many of us parents have maxed out our credit cards, remortgaged our homes in order to keep up with the Joneses, so to speak, next door? And how can we possibly imagine that that would not have a negative impact on our general level of well-being at the level of your heart and your soul and your sense of contentment? Tragically today, for people in my age group, which are mid 40s through mid 50s, the majority of us are not prepared for retirement financially. I'm certainly not, that's for sure. I'm starting from scratch all over again. We have, even with our 1.2 children, or whatever the statistics are, the expectation is to get post-secondary education and that we'll pay for it. Well, where's that money going to come from? Because when I went to university, it was $1,500 a year tuition only, and I know now it's with living expenses and so forth, you're looking at 10 grand a year at least, especially if they move away from home. So good luck with that, as well as saving for your own retirement. So anyway, so there's our second point. Firstly, the structure of the family and society's expectations of what a normal family looks like, has added stress. The financial situation driven by the expectations of society is another stressor, which is further placed in another layer of I'll just call it guilt on all of us, that we ought to be doing better for ourselves and for our children. And now the third point I want to make is the business environment itself. So somewhat on a micro level, when you're working in a business. So take me, for example, or you. You're a man or a woman. You're rushing in the morning to get the kids ready for daycare or school, either way. And you're repeating yourself 5 times over, don't forget your lunchbox type of thing. Yet the child still does. You're racing them off to the bus stop or to the school directly, and then you're half checking your email because you feel like you're falling behind, even though you may be early for work, and you get there. And then it's a treadmill all day. We're skipping breaks, we're skipping lunches, or we're actually taking smoke breaks, just to get a drug into our system to alleviate a bit of tension that we have. And then at the end of the day, guess what? It's not the end of the day, it's the end of part of your day. And for one of the two parents, they're scooting off to after school daycare to pick up the kids, or to get home for the kids if they're old enough to be there on their own, to make supper and so forth. I have a sneaking suspicion there's less of an expectation for the other parent to be there by 5:30 for supper, for a family meal. I know in my household it wasn't. I was working until 7, 8 o'clock on a light day, let alone the other days. So we're seeing a lot of business pressure being placed on people. And if you look at want ads, for lack of a better phrase, as I am for a career, look at just read what they're looking for. They're looking for people with experience in that industry. Well, that's not unreasonable, but they're looking for multitaskers. They're looking for people that can handle a heavy workload. They're looking for people that work well under pressure. Gee, how many times have I seen that one written in a job ad? They're basically looking for Superman. And for those of us in management in particular, we know darn well it's not an 8:30 to 5 environment any longer. There's no more punching the clock at 5 p.m. Say, well, that's it for the day, boss. I'm out of here. It's like, no, you're working until the project is done if you have a deadline that day or the next morning, which isn't always a bad thing. I mean, any good employee needs to be flexible and so forth. But let's say that employee is feeling guilt about not spending quality time with their children. They're not getting home at night for bedtime. So they don't even see their children, or worse, they're feeling their children aren't seeing them. If an emergency crops up in the run of the day, which of the two parents is going to go pick up the child at school? Often it's the mother, which leads to absenteeism at work and so forth. And, you put all these things together, it's no wonder 2/3 of us are facing mental distress of some nature, and be it depression, be it anxiety, be it a lack of self-confidence, and then you add on top of that our egos. I want to be known as a vice president. I want to be known as a director. I want my family, my neighbors, and my friends, when the topic does come up, to view me as a successful member of society. And women are faced by the same thing. So and that's an inner pressure, but I do believe it starts out externally. Going back to my point about how we are somewhat expected out of the goodness of society's heart to do better than our parents did. So we've got all of this crap laid on top of us without any real understanding for the human spirit and how much this can diminish us as human beings and wear us down. And hence we come to the typical scenario where an employee is out on stress leave, which is never looked upon as a valid reason. And even if it is a real reason, oftentimes, unintentionally, managers who have not dealt with mental illness will possibly, not always, but possibly view that employee as weak. As one of my former vice presidents told me when I said, look, I'm feeling better being off on disability. I'm ready for a graduated return to work. And he said, no. He said, Dave, how do I know you're not going to have another breakdown tomorrow? Well, that speaks volumes as to the mental mindset of that individual. And why would I want to go into that work environment again, knowing that he had such an archaic view? But that is the reality. And my hope is you work in an environment where mental health is proactively supported, acknowledged. There's an open door policy with your manager, with your peers, with HR, with EAP, all of these resources that larger corporations typically have, and a sense of trust that if you go to your boss, and I really hope you have this opportunity or have this relationship, I should say, that, if you've been with the company for a while and they know your work ethic and they understand that you're not the type just to skip off on a Monday because it's sunny in July. They know you're a hard worker, you have a good attendance rate, but lately things have been building up and building and building, and say you do need some time off or you need a lighter workload and you're worried about, well, what's the boss going to think? Or are they going to fire me because I can't hack it like the person who sits beside me that seemingly seems perfect and able to go on with everything? Well, I hope you have a relationship with your manager where you can go with them with a sense of trust and the knowledge that they're well enough informed that you may be getting to the point of the equivalent of a fracture to the bone in your arm, and you don't want it to break, so you need to ease up. You know, but in a mental capacity, however that defines itself. It could be a sick parent that you're caring for. I mean, really, after studying history in university, I don't think individuals in families have ever faced the same level of continuous 24/7 pressures coming from in and outside the home. And that has got to have some sort of impact on us. We are not supermen. We are regular human beings. We are not flawed, but we have our limits like everyone does. And unqualified, consistent, high-level stress over a long period of time will take its health toll on just about anyone. Sometimes physically, sometimes mentally. So my tip for you, if my tips are helpful at all, is be very aware of your values, what you prioritize in your life. And it's okay to acknowledge that, yeah, prestige and money are a high priority for me. That's okay. But think about it as well in terms of, okay, but at what cost? There isn't an ever expanding 24 hours in the run of a day. So how are you making sure your physical health is okay? How are you making sure your spiritual and mental health is okay? Your family's health, your marriage, your children, that you have availability to them. And yeah, that you have the resources available to provide for your family. These are things that I think really need to be thought through earlier rather than later after something breaks, like a marital breakdown, a child who winds up on drugs, possibly because they feel ignored by their super busy parents, any number of things. Heart attack, stroke, reaching for drugs like cigarettes, as I have, alcoholism, you name it. Take my word for it. I've heard of and seen, both of myself and others, enough examples of how people have struggled so hard to keep it all together, and unfortunately the coping skills that they have utilized have only added to the damage that has been done, and in all honesty through no fault of their own, just by circumstance and because of the expectations they place on themselves. So in gratitude to that great corporation in Canada who led Let's Talk Day yesterday around mental health, I leave you with these thoughts. I certainly encourage you to subscribe. Let me see here. Where would it be in your video? I don't know. Anyway, there's a subscribe button. But more importantly, I'd like to get your feedback and your thoughts. I haven't received any, and this will be the 10th episode that I put up there on YouTube. So if these videos are running too long, if you don't like the backgrounds in my home office here, if you find me rambling, if you don't find the information I'm sharing to be useful, and you're looking for something more, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bada bing, bada boom, we're out in 4 minutes, then please let me know. So that's very important to me, because the only reason I'm doing this is to help you and to help me. So thank you again for watching episode 10, and you have a great day.